Hey everyone, Ben here. Today we're going to be exploring a fascinating question. Is an AI better than a human at picking a watch collection? We're teaming up with ChatGPT-4, an advanced AI, to find 3 affordable watches that make a collection worth under $300 in total, which is about £250. Let's see if it can outsmart a seasoned watch enthusiast like me. Stick around as we put this AI to the test, reveal its picks, and ultimately decide if it's truly up to the task. Can it surprise us with its selections? Or will it prove that human intuition and experience still reigns supreme? So I have to admit, this AI hasn't got off to the best start. Again? I've already told you. Maybe this artificial intelligence isn't so intelligent after all. Okay, what is it we're dealing with here? Well, if you've been paying attention to the news recently, you've probably heard that AI has been progressing at a frankly alarming rate. ChatGPT in particular, developed by a company called OpenAI, is a crazy clever chatbot released to the public in late 2022 due to the humanized nature of its responses. Just ask it a question or give it a prompt and it'll confidently reply within a few seconds. Now, I've never been one to fear AI taking over in some sort of Terminator-like scenario, but I have to say, even I was intrigued by the accuracy and intricacy of its responses. There's no doubt it blows gimmicks like Siri or Bixby completely out of the water.
Wow, Ben, that hurt.
In fact, I've had you on a bit here. You see, I even let ChatGPT write the intro script for this video. Sounded pretty natural, right? More recently, they released an even more advanced version called ChatGPT-4, which somehow boosts the realism again, so much so that Microsoft invested $10 billion into OpenAI and integrated it within their Bing search engine. You see, the regular versions of ChatGPT were trained using information that was dated up to September 2021, meaning they weren't fully up to date and couldn't actively search the internet for answers. Now though, with the Bing integration, you can use the tool as you would a normal internet search engine, but with supposedly improved results. I'll leave a link to it in the video description so you can have a play with it yourself. We'll give it some prompts, see what it comes up with, and then we'll compare it with the 3 suggestions I have already written down in this envelope. Those are basically the 3 watches that I had in my mind that I was going to go with. Will it match me or even outdo me? Let's find out. Here we go then. Can you suggest the best 3 watch collection that's readily available in the UK for under $300 or £250 altogether? And then I got a little bit nosy. For each watch, can you provide reasons why it was chosen and its best features? I'm interested to know the thought process of this AI. Okay, let's see what it comes up with. So that's our 3 suggestions: a Casio G-Shock, some sort of fossil smartwatch, and the rotary Aquaspeed. Now, one thing that might concern me is that, looking here, it's pulled information from sites like Men's Health and GQ, who aren't known to be particularly good when it comes to recommending watches. It looks like my question wasn't specific enough though, as this channel isn't really about smartwatches, so let's see if it can recommend an alternative to that one. It's always nice, isn't it, when one comes up that you already own. Okay, so that's our 3 then. The rotary Aquaspeed, the Seiko SNK 809, and the Casio G-Shock GWG101A3ER. So I have to admit, this AI hasn't got off to the best start, mainly because if you look at the page here, just the G-Shock alone totals more than the equivalent of $300 or about £250. Maybe this artificial intelligence isn't quite so intelligent. Let's see if it can explain itself.
A few moments later.
Okay, that looks a bit more like it. Although this time they've gone super cheap, if anything. Casio F91W, you all know that one. Timex Weekender, and the Casio MQ247BLL. At least we know they're definitely within the budget this time. You know what? Scratch that. I'm really not happy with the results from the Bing search. I've decided we're just going to lob it, or a slight version of the question, straight into ChatGPT-4 to see if that generates any sort of better result. Here we go. Can you suggest the best sub $300 brackets sub $250 3 watch collection? For each watch, can you provide reasons why you chose it and its best features? Come on. So you can clearly tell here, this implementation of ChatGPT, despite not having any internet connection at all, has generated what I think is certainly more detailed and better response. Perhaps the Bing AI is using an older version of ChatGPT than we all thought. One thing I will say is good luck getting a G-Shock in the UK for 40 quid these days. So we've got the Casio G-Shock DW5600, the Timex Weekender chronograph, and the Orient Bambino version 2. Let's analyze these and see, are these any better for the money? And how much is this actually going to cost me these days? So I've got the 3 recommendations here in front of me. They're all linked down below alongside some other pics you'll see later in this video. After initially misunderstanding me, the AI seems to have overcompensated somewhat and it's gone super thrifty instead. All in, this collection only totals about £75 or about 95 US dollars. Which hardly aligns with the initial budget that I suggested. Let's go straight in with the Old Faithful, the Casio F91W. If you've seen my review of this one, you'll know it's essentially the world's most popular watch, at least in terms of raw sales. It's small, hardy, and provides you a view of the time for virtually no money. For those reasons, this really does have a cult following. Perhaps you know at least 1 or 2 people that wear one of these. It's also got that cool retro appearance, which has made it quite popular in the fashion scene. While it is decent, I'm surprised this was chosen because it tends to retail for less than 1/10 of the overall budget. There really was quite a bit more wiggle room here, which would have opened up more options. The thing with the F91 is, at least from a functional perspective, it's got a terrible backlight. Newer alternatives like the W86, also from Casio, or the F105W both remedy this with much better options. The W86 even offers improved water resistance too. Still, this F91 is quite an iconic piece, so perhaps it still deserves an inclusion here regardless. Next up is the Timex Weekender. This is another one that I featured years ago on Ben's Watch Club, mainly due to its high level of popularity again. This one comes in different sizes and with a variety of dial and strap colours to choose from. In that regard, it's a real crowd pleaser. There are other versions of this watch too, such as the chronograph and Fairfield models, which I've seen labelled as Weekenders before now. While it is a reasonable watch, in 2023, the Weekender is almost obsolete at the price it tends to retail for. The issue is that rival brands like Loris are now making steel and even titanium field watches that look similar to this, but for even lower prices usually. Meanwhile, this lowly Weekender has only been left with a poor brass case. This chromed brass, it really doesn't last quite as well in the long run. Also, this regular version of the Weekender has an infamously loud tick. Unless you find it soothing, this will drive you mad at night. These days, it's even been cooked by another Timex altogether, that being the Expedition North series. There are some models in there that use steel cases, sapphire crystals, and a more premium solar or mechanical movement in a similar looking package. Those Expedition North models, they are more expensive, and I'll leave the visual judgments to you at home. But some versions are probably within the budget of this challenge, and they're substantially better constructed than this one. For UK customers at least, I know which way I'd be going. Perhaps the only comeback is that the Weekender does offer Indiglow. That's their really effective nightlight system where you just compress the crown. Unfortunately, and rather surprisingly, that isn't often included on the higher end Timex watches. And finally then, we get to the Casio MQ24. This is often the cheapest analog watch you can find on most of these sites like Amazon or eBay, and it's basically Casio's bottom of the barrel analog choice. It's resin like the F91, it comes with rudimentary specifications, but it is insanely low cost and has a nice clear dial for easy reading. At about £10, this is the cheapest analog watch that will last a reasonable amount of time, and while it looks alright, to me it makes little sense to have both this and the F91 as part of the same 3-piece collection. Simply due to being digital, the F91 does the whole function thing better, right? If you're choosing between these two to just tell you the time, you're probably going to go with this one. The band on the F91 also feels maybe marginally better too, and when you look at this collection, you're not really left with any sort of dress option at all. I imagine if I tried on the MQ24 to a fancy bar, I'd probably get laughed out of the venue. Now, even with this selection, we may have some budget issues. But before we get onto it, I want to show you a rather smart AI secret that I've been using right here for the whole duration of this video. It's a software that I've been using daily since early last year. My editor uses it, and I know loads of other YouTube creators use it as well. It's called Notion, and they've sponsored this video so I can show you a couple of behind the scenes tricks. For the most part, Notion is a flexible workspace tool that you can customize to suit your needs. Here's a sneaky look at our back end. A couple of things blurred out. I created this, the content board, so my editor and our blog writers can track the currently planned content on our channel and website. When I click on each of these tabs, it opens up what's like a dedicated page in which I can do a bunch of stuff. I can assign a writer, a sponsor, rate the idea, basically guess if you'll enjoy the video or not. I can make notes about the video or the watches that I want to include in it. There's even a checklist segment I've created and a script section so I can read straight off my tablet. Yeah, in videos where I use a script, I will just read straight off this tablet on the Notion app. Basically, you name it and it's in there. Let's say I've just finished filming a video like this one. I can then drag my project window across to the video editing section, so my editor knows it's ready for him to take a look at. Lots of YouTubers have a similar setup to this that's just tuned to their preferences. Now here's the bit I think loads of them are using without you even realizing it: Notion AI. It's currently unknown which AI provider they've teamed up with for this feature, but essentially it's a handy AI tool that's baked straight into Notion, and it provides a bunch of easy to use one-click functions that aid your productivity. Unlike Microsoft Bing search or the ChatGPT AIs mentioned before, Notion's AI is very much tailored for this use case. For instance, you can straight up generate ideas for video topics, titles, scripts, and more. It can do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Now, I generally like to create those things myself as I think it gives a more organic result, but I reckon you're going to see a lot of creators almost auto-generating their whole videos using such methods, if they're not already, because they could well be. The thing is, the results are so human-like, I think it'll get to the point where you can't even tell. Something I have experimented with is their more subtle features that just modify your existing content, like their spelling and grammar checker, as well as their tone changer. Sometimes something just doesn't sound quite right when I read it back. With Notion AI, I can quickly highlight that section and make it shorter or make it sound more straightforward simply at the click of a button. I can even translate my writing into foreign languages in a couple of presses too. Not sure what I'd use that for, but it's cool to see my videos written out in Dutch or Indonesian. The great thing with Notion is it's adaptable for almost any industry, not just content creation or not necessarily just work either. It comes with a range of pre-built templates based on a large range of subjects to easily get you started. Even the AI side of things has presets for day-to-day stuff like stories, to-do lists and poems, as well as more specific things like sales emails, meeting agendas and social media posts. Notion works on all major platforms. You can check it out using the links down below. Without Notion, I'd probably be uploading even fewer videos. First up, the Casio G-Shock DW5600. Honestly, this is a solid choice, probably a better one than all three in the last collection. Now, it may be a bit chunky for some people. I get that, me probably included. However, when it comes to a 3-watch collection, you've really got to be ruthless. You need one watch that's just there, dedicated to taking a beating, and this does that very well. The DW5600, or the green version I've got here, it's among the most affordable G-Shocks. Normally you can get one from around £70 to £100 in the UK. And it seems like ChatGPT hasn't really taken inflation into account, because let's be honest, we haven't seen these at £40 in quite some time. Still, if you need a watch for a manual job or even just projects or handiwork at home, this is the one to go for. As the feature list correctly points out, this has got really good water resistance and some simple, practical functions that aren't too confusing or overwhelming. When it gets to a point when a watch has tons of features, often it becomes very cluttered and more difficult to use, and I find myself less likely to use them. That said, if you're more confident than me, there are other versions which have even more stuff packed in, though they would eat up an even more sizable portion of our budget, which isn't optimal when we're already overrun. ChatGPT also identified that this is a homage to the original G-Shock from the 80s, though it didn't mention that this is one of the smaller G-Shock models that makes it quite a bit more palatable than some of the giant ones. Some of those even challenge Invicta in terms of sizing. Next up, we've got the Timex Weekender chronograph. Looks like these AIs like Timex. As the name suggests, this one is just a larger chronograph version of the Weekender that we looked at previously. Basically, it's got a stopwatch. I'm gonna be honest, I've never been super impressed with this piece for a couple of reasons. First up, I'm not sure it looks quite as nice as the Weekender. Obviously, it's quite a bit more cluttered and it is larger. You don't have size choices with this model. Additionally, I don't know whether I've had a really bad run with these, but I've had quite a few issues with the movements inside. Yet again, you'll notice that this one is misaligned when it gets reset. It's supposed to go to 12 and it's not just 1 second off, it's 2 seconds off. Okay, so this can be resolved by pulling out the crown all the way and then compressing the top pusher until it points correctly. That said, this is a task meant for Timex's quality control department, not the end consumer, who probably doesn't know this fix. I've had this problem with previous units which I've had to send back, some of which just outright died. Again, this one does have Indiglow, but it also has the same shortcomings as some of the other ones. The one problem it does sidestep is the ticking noise. This one is way quieter. One thing I will say is that decent chronographs they are quite hard to come by at this price. So I guess this justifies its inclusion a bit better than the regular weekender. While I don't think it's a stunner, the Americana design goes really well with casual outfits. I think this colorway in particular is probably the one to go for. You can wear this with leathers or with fabric stuff, no problem. ChatGPT's findings also echo that, with it commenting not only on the versatile aesthetic, but the chronograph function and affordability too. Rounding out the robotic picks is the Orient Bambino V2. Now, the Orient Bambino is essentially known for being the best value budget dress watch. I'd say it's the best looking for around £120 or closer to 100 if you're lucky. If you've watched any of my videos featuring one of these watches, you've probably got a good idea of its strengths, that being beautiful construction, a surprisingly competent in-house movement, and meticulous designs that look much more expensive than they actually are. The version 2 suggested by ChatGPT is this one, which is like the vintage styled one. You can see it's got Roman numerals in place of the typical hour markers, that creamy off-white color, as well as those really slim hands as well. Those hands especially, I think, look much better than the chunky ones on the Bauhaus version 3 option. Again, this one comes in multiple colors, though the best seller does seem to be this cream one. While the AI came up with some good reasons for picking this one, like those I just mentioned, I wouldn't identify that 40-hour power reserve as being a particularly standout feature. It's certainly not a major advantage of this watch versus all others. After all, the overwhelming majority of entry-level automatics have a comparable power reserve to that anyway. It's more of an industry standard amount, kind of like how steel is the industry standard material for watches. While it's okay, I wouldn't call it much of a highlight. What I will say is that overall, this time round, this AI watch collection is much more well-rounded than the first one. The G-Shock nails the practical side of things, you've got the Weekender as your casual option, while the Bambino will have you covered for more formal events. There's much more variety and you're not just left with 3 similar options this time. Unfortunately, something you won't be left with is money. Or at least, I won't be left with it. Because unless you're feeling extra patient or super thrifty, you really aren't going to find these 3 watches for within the budget. I'd say minimum you're looking at spending is an extra £50 to £75 on top of that. Do we even count this as a viable selection? I'm not sure. What did I have then? What did I pick within this price range? Has the AI read my mind? Well, let's open it up and take a look. Oh look, it seems I've cheated. Yeah, what I've done is I've actually gone for 2 different sets of watches here. I've got one for average to larger wrists, and then one for smaller wrists too. This gives the AI kind of like twice the success chances here. Now, the reason I went with 2 lists is because of this. This is the mighty Casio MDV 106 dive watch. Now, I have to say, I was a little surprised when this didn't make an appearance on either AI list. You see, the Duro, as it's nicknamed, is widely considered to be the best value dive watch basically that money can buy. At a similar price to some of the Timex Weekender models, you get a rugged watch that is far better constructed and easy on the eyes too. Unlike other dive style watches in its price range, the Duro doesn't compromise on water resistance. This beast has a full 200 meter rating. It even has a fully and fairly decent rotating bezel, while most of its rivals at this price point just have one that's fixed in place. For most wrists, this watch is still a killer deal even years after its release. But the 44mm size makes it a no-go for slim arms, unless you fancy the rather inelegant overhanging look. So yeah, that's why I've gone with 2 lists, because one simply had to include this watch. Okay, let's analyze the picks then. So we've got the MDV 106, which you can get on the low end for about £65 here in the UK. If you're in the US or abroad, you can probably get it cheaper. And here are my other 2 selections as well. Now, one is actually one I mentioned earlier when looking at the AI choices, that being the Loris Steel Field Watch. Now, admittedly, these ones are quite small, so they might look a little stubby on the largest of wrists. As you can see, I need to change the battery on my option here, but the value is out of this world. For around £30 at the time of writing, you get a steel watch with an insane level of low light performance. It's super slim, fairly good looking, and has good water resistance to boot. What more do you need from a field watch? This is usually cheaper than the Timex Weekender, and objectively, it's just a better watch. Then we have the Bambino. While the AI may have selected the V2, and I really would go for the V1 because it's the cheapest option, I reckon you can count that as a match because outside of some minor cosmetic differences, they really are the same watch. Now, the one I have in front of me is actually the 38mm version, but it's the most visually similar to the V1. There's just no point in me buying another identical watch for this video. But yeah, you should know what to expect from this one by now. See, that's my main selection. Not the most colorful, admittedly, but you are covered in all scenarios here. No digital watch, but you've got a nice casual option, a hardy tool/dive watch that you can use for anything involving water, and a really capable dress watch too. And crucially, you got a much higher chance of finding all three of these together for under the budget that we assigned at the start of the video. At my time of pulling the trigger, that came to 230. For smaller arms, one of them remains the same, that being the Loris watch, but we've mixed up the other two rather substantially. First up is the Seagull 1963. Now, I know some of you don't like supporting Chinese companies, and fair play, but I had to find a way of cramming this into the slim selection because it's just outrageously good value on a physical level. For the full details, check out the video I released not too long ago, but the short of it is, if you've got a slim arm, you'll want to go with the 38mm version, and if you want to stick within the budget, you'll pretty much have to choose the one with the cheapest movement, as well as the acrylic crystal. You can find this quite frequently on AliExpress, just keep an eye out for discount codes as well. There are even sporty versions of this chrono available if you wanted a bit more of a modern look. The case finishing is nice, the hand wound movement is very elaborate for the money, and it offers far more personality than most rather vanilla options at this price bracket. And rounding out this tier is the Timex Midtown. This is like the updated and upgraded version of the Timex Fairfield I mentioned before. If you shop around, you can currently get this for between about £90 and £105. And while that makes it much more expensive than its forebearer, it's clearly a better watch. The case and its finishing are a tremendous improvement with steel construction and alternating flanks. They make this watch appear far classier. Water resistance is better, the movement is quieter, and the dial has this nice sexy curved perimeter. Really helps to prevent this rather standard watch from looking too generic. The only real downgrade is the absence of Indiglo. Kind of like the Seagull, you can use this one to straddle between both formal and casual use cases, and it really means this 3-watch collection gives you a fair amount of options. They also do a chronograph version of this Midtown, but that seems to be really hard to come by at the moment. Now, the logical inclusion here in place of the Timex would have been one of the smaller versions of the Orient Bambino, but unfortunately the 36 and 38mm options command a higher price tag than the larger ones, which really would bump them out of the budget, and I'm not going to cheat like AI. On that subject, let's review the AI then. Is this actually a tool that you could use to find watches to add to your collection? For the Bing integration of ChatGPT, hell no, or at least not yet. This one still seems to have major issues. Firstly, it failed to recognize my budget, despite me being really specific with my request. Then when it did correct itself, it went to the opposite end of the spectrum and just opted for 3 super cheap watches. I get it, all of those watches are reasonable in their own right, if not decent, but £75 was nowhere near the budget I assigned it. Secondly, this version of the AI seems like it's just pulling answers directly from specific web pages. And unfortunately, some of the sources it's using are laughable, quite frankly. It seems this AI isn't at the point where it can recognize that the websites it's referencing are some of the same sites that tend to review and recommend watches which they've never actually laid their hands on. The same sites that only ever use stock images because they can't photograph a watch that they don't actually own. Perhaps this ChatGPT integration is more used for the verbiage side of things, rather than getting involved in the search function itself to any degree. I'm unsure, but either way, it doesn't seem particularly clever. And as such, I'd probably avoid using that version, at least until it's improved. I bet if I'd searched a few more times, I probably would have ended up with 2 movements and a Philippe Loretti. Despite lacking any active internet connection, I think the OpenAI's ChatGPT 4 gave a much better selection. True, it definitely failed to land within budget, but it wasn't miles off, and it was basing its prices probably on that 2021 or before data, maybe even older, because I can't remember G-Shock's being £40. Again, it provided accurate reasons for why it selected the watches, and unlike the Bing option, it didn't just seem to be copying ideas from other websites. Perhaps it was weighing up a wider variety of options and opinions from its data set to try and figure out the general consensus instead. Here are the collections on screen now. I want to know, which picks do you think are better? The human, me, or the AI? Let me know in the comments below. Hopefully I'm still in a job by the end of it. If you enjoyed, consider subscribing and check out this video on screen now, where I go through the best watches on Amazon. You'll be able to make a pretty decent collection with those two, I'm sure.